Hey guys, welcome to another video. In this video, I'll be talking about SA210 that talks about agreeing the terms of an audit engagement, right? Agreeing the terms of an audit engagement. So in this, we're just going to, I'll just show you the topics that will be covered very quickly, right? Firstly, we'll discuss what the objective as per SA210 is, meaning when the auditor should accept or continue an engagement. And next, we'll talk about what are the things that are to be, or rather, what are the characteristics of an agreement, okay, of an audit engagement. Next, what are the contents of the audit engagement letter. Next, we'll talk about limitation on the scope of audit. Now, this is not related to the inherent limitations. Inherent limitations is different. Okay, this relates to the limitation that is placed by the person who is getting audited on the scope of audit. Meaning, if they tell that you're not allowed, like before accepting the audit, they tell that you're allowed to check only this, or if they're limiting your scope of audit, that time what is to be done is discussed in this. And then after you accept the audit engagement, if there is any changes that are to be made in the audit engagement, then what is to be done is also covered in this video. And lastly, agreement in case of recurring audit, right? So whether you can use the same audit engagement terms and conditions, or whether you can use the same engagement letter, whether you have to remind them, whether there is a requirement for revision of the audit engagement letter, or rather the terms of an audit engagement, right? So all that will be covered here. Okay, next. So without any further ado, we'll just jump into it. Okay, so here SA210, agreeing the terms of an audit engagement. So what are the objectives of an auditor as per SA210? It is only to, firstly, he should accept or continue an audit engagement when basis upon which it is to be performed has been agreed to. Okay, so how will he agree to those, or how will he agree to the basis upon which it is to be performed? First, he will ensure that he will establish whether preconditions for an audit are present or not. If you remember in the first audit chapter 1 video, we had discussed what preconditions are. In case you haven't watched it, I have covered it here again. Okay, so I would recommend you to watch that video first, right? So let me just start from the top again. Okay, so firstly, the objective of the auditor, right, when it comes to agreeing the terms of an audit engagement, he should accept or continue an audit engagement when the basis upon which it here means the audit engagement. Okay, it here means the audit engagement. Okay, so he should accept or continue an audit engagement when the basis upon which it is to be performed has been agreed through establishing whether preconditions for an audit are present, and so both of these are to be present. Okay, and confirming common understanding between the auditor and the management or TCWG, meaning those charged with governance, as to the terms of audit engagement. So basically, what they are trying to tell is, before accepting or continuing, there should be first of all, the preconditions should exist, meaning the preconditions have to be agreed to, right? So if the preconditions are there, and if there is a common understanding, or if there is no confusion as to the terms of the audit engagement between the between the auditor and the management, right? If there is no confusion with regard to that, then he can accept or continue. Basically, what this SA210 is trying to tell is that the auditor shall accept or continue an audit engagement only after these conditions are satisfied. Okay, let's just try to say that with like off the screen, right? So here, as per SA210, the auditor shall agree or continue, or rather not agree, accept or continue an audit engagement. Continue and I'll just put AE. Continue an audit engagement when the terms, or rather when the basis upon which it is to be performed, the basis upon which it is to be performed, is agreed through what are the two things? The two conditions are establishing whether the preconditions are present, or the preconditions of audit are present, and meaning both conditions are to be satisfied, right? Both conditions are to be satisfied. And what is the other condition? The other is through confirming, or rather ensuring common understanding between auditor and management, the management or TCWG, right? Right. So we just try telling it again. Okay. So the auditor shall accept or continue an audit engagement when the basis upon which it is to be performed has been agreed through establishing whether the preconditions for an audit are present, and confirming that there is common understanding, right? Confirming common understanding between the auditor and management and TCWG as to the terms of the audit engagement. Okay, right. Now what are the preconditions? The preconditions were to determine whether the FRF is acceptable. Like there are three, right? I'll just zoom out so you can see. Okay, so firstly, determine whether the FRF is acceptable. What is FRF? FRF is the financial reporting framework. Okay, so determine whether the financial reporting framework is acceptable. Next, obtain agreement from management that it acknowledges and understands its responsibility to obtain agreement from management that it acknowledges and understands its responsibility for the preparation and presentation of financial statements as per applicable financial reporting framework, and design, implementation and maintenance of internal control to ensure that the preparation and presentation of financial statements is free from material misstatement, whether due to fraud or error. Provide the auditor access to all information, any additional information, and unrestricted access to any person that the auditor deems necessary for obtaining evidence, right? Okay. So here, in the first case, right, where the preconditions are not present, okay, if the preconditions are not present, right, then you will have to discuss the matters with the management, and wherever, if it is required, unless it is required by law or regulation, you shall not accept the proposed audit engagement. Meaning, either if either of this, meaning either one or two, either one of this is not there, or rather if it is not present, then you shall not accept the terms of engagement unless it is required by law or regulation. Okay, cool. Next we'll move on to so we'll just tick this off over here. Okay, so the first part where objective as per SA210 is complete. Okay, so we'll move on to the next one where we talk about the agreement on terms of audit engagement. Okay, So it just talks about how, or rather what the characteristics of an audit engagement terms are. Okay, so firstly, the auditor shall agree the terms of an audit engagement with TCWG or management. Okay, first, the terms of an audit engagement must be agreed to. Okay, that is the most basic part, right? The auditor shall agree to the terms of the audit engagement with TCWG or management. TCWG is those charged with governance, or the management. Okay, next, in the second part, in the second point is terms of an audit engagement. Okay, so what are the terms of what are the characteristics of the terms of audit engagement? Okay, firstly, there should be a clear understanding, right? So auditor and the client should be clear about the nature of engagement. Okay, it should not be like the client is expecting an like client wants a review, right? So client wants a review engagement, but we are under the assumption that we have to perform an audit engagement, right? So there is no clear understanding about the nature of the engagement, right? So firstly, the auditor and the client must be clear about the nature of engagement, right? Next, it should be in writing. Okay, so the terms of the engagement must be in writing. Okay, next, it should specify the scope of work, and it should be sent by the auditor to the client. Okay, so basically 4 points within the characteristics of the terms of audit engagement. Firstly, there should be a clear understanding about the nature of engagement. Secondly, it should be in writing. Third, this engagement, terms of engagement, should specify the scope of work that is to be performed. And lastly, this audit engagement, terms of audit engagement, is sent by the auditor to his client. Many people are under the assumption that it is actually sent from the client to auditor. No, it is sent by the auditor to his client. Okay, so that is the terms of an audit engagement, right? Next, precautions in case of partnership firms. Okay, like, meaning this is not talking about the auditor being partnership. This is about the client being a partnership, or the person who is being audited, if that person who is being audited is a partnership firm, right? So what are the precautions that are to be taken? Okay, so firstly, appointment of auditor is governed by the partnership clause, a partnership deed. Okay, so you'll have to find that clause which relates to appointment of auditor, right? Next, must get clear idea of nature and service required. Okay, and lastly, it should ensure that its appointment is valid. Okay, so basically there are only three things, right? Firstly, that the auditor shall agree the terms of an audit engagement. Next, the characteristics, right? So the terms of an audit engagement, firstly, it should be in writing, right? Next, it should specify the scope of work, and there should be a clear understanding between the auditor and his client about the nature of engagement. And lastly, it is sent by the auditor to his client, right? And the third point is the precautions that are to be taken in case of partnerships, okay, where the client is a partnership firm. Okay, firstly, we have to write that the appointment is governed by the partnership deed. Secondly, there should be a clear understanding of the nature of service required, nature and service required. And lastly, we should ensure that the appointment is valid. Okay, let's just go off screen and write this. Okay, so when it comes to agreement as to terms of audit, agreement of terms of engagement, right? Terms of engagement. Firstly, it is very obvious that the auditor has to agree the terms of audit. Okay, auditor has to agree the terms of audit. With whom should he get this agreement with? Has to agree the terms of audit. With whom? With management or TCWG. Okay. Secondly, terms of engagement. What are the characteristics of the terms of engagement? Okay, so you can use this second point as the basis. Like when you're writing an answer, you can use this as an introduction, right? So what are the characteristics of the terms of engagement? Firstly, there should be a clear understanding between auditor and client as to the nature of engagement, right? So there should be a clear understanding between the auditor and the client as to the nature of engagement, right? Next, what was the other point? The other point was that it must be in writing, right? Agreement or the terms must be in writing. Alright, I'll just put it must be in writing. Right. Next, third point, that the terms of engagement, I'll just put TOE. The terms of engagement must specify the scope of work. It must specify scope of work. Okay. Next, or rather scope of the engagement. Okay. Next, lastly, there should be this terms of engagement, or rather it is sent by auditor to the client. Okay, so it is sent by the auditor to the client. And final point for this entire thing is that what was the final point? It was about the partnership firm, right? In case of partnership firms, okay. So what are or rather precautions in case of partnership firm? Oops, that entire thing went off. Okay, so precautions in case, we'll just cover that from here. Okay, so the precautions in case of partnership firms are that the appointment is governed by the partnership deed. He must get a clear idea of the nature of service required, and lastly, he should ensure that his appointment is valid. Okay, next. Next, we'll just do a quick revision from the top again. Okay, so what was so we covered this part also, the agreement on terms of audit engagement, right? So this again another second topic covered. Okay, so what did this talk about? This talked about that the auditor should agree, or rather accept or continue an audit engagement when the basis upon which it is to be performed has been agreed, right? Basis upon which it is to be performed has been agreed through. So firstly, agreed through, what are the two conditions? First is establishing whether the preconditions exist, or whether preconditions are present, right? Next, what was the other condition? It was that confirming that there is common understanding, right? Whether there is common understanding between the auditor and the management, of TCWG, right? As to the terms of engagement, okay. So this was related to this. Okay, now agreement, what did we read about the agreement on terms of audit engagement? We read that firstly that the auditor has to agree the terms of audit engagement, right? Auditor has to agree terms of audit or terms of engagement with management or TCWG, right? Secondly, the characteristics are, firstly, it should be or rather there should be a clear understanding, right? Clear understanding as to the nature, clear understanding as to nature of engagement, right? Nature of engagement. Next is that it should be in writing. And just put in writing, right? In writing. And next next that the it should specify scope of work, right? It should specify scope of work. Okay. And what is the last part? The last point in this second paragraph was that it is sent by the auditor to his client, right? Third one was relating to the partnership firm audit, right? What are the 3 points there? Firstly, that the partnership deed governs appointment, or rather appointment is governed by the partnership deed. Appointment is governed by partnership deed, right? And he needs to obtain an understanding of needs to obtain understanding of obtain understanding of the work to be done, okay, work or service to be provided, right? Lastly, it was he should ensure that his appointment is valid, right? Ensure appointment is valid. Okay. Next we'll move on to what are the contents. Okay, what are the contents of an audit engagement letter? Okay, so what should be there in the audit engagement letter? Okay, right. Okay, so all agreed terms shall be recorded in the engagement letter or any other suitable written format. Okay, so here obviously we know that or rather it is very obvious here that it should be in written format only. Okay, that it oral agreement is not acceptable. There should be written format only. Okay, so all terms shall be recorded in the engagement letter or in any other suitable written format. Okay, what should it include? It should include the objective and scope of audit, meaning what are the things that will be covered, what falls in the objective and what falls in the scope of audit, right? Next, the auditor's responsibility, management's responsibility, and then identification of applicable financial reporting framework for preparation and presentation of financial statements, and lastly, reference to expected format and content of audit report, along with a statement that the format and content could differ in certain circumstances. Okay. So this is not in detail, this is just an overview, right? So the objective and scope of audit in the I think we discussed in the previous video regarding what the scope of audit is, right? So first, there are only 5 things, right? So what the auditor or what the audit engagement letter should include. So firstly, it is the objective and scope of audit, auditor's responsibility, management's responsibility, identification of AFRF, okay, identification of AFRF, right? Lastly, the expected format, okay, expected format and content of audit report, right? So like as an overview, these are the things that are to be included in the audit report, okay, included in the audit engagement letter, right? I mean, I don't think this is that hard, it's just filled with a lot of mugging up, so there's like nothing else that can be done, like you just have to try to tell it again and again. And by the way, this content of audit engagement letter has come multiple times in the exam, so it's pretty important. Okay, so try to remember that. Okay, so firstly, all terms shall be recorded in the engagement letter or in any other suitable written format. Okay, next, what are the rather the audit engagement letter should include, firstly, the objective and scope of audit, auditor's responsibility, management's responsibility, and identification of applicable financial reporting framework for preparation and presentation of financial statements, and lastly the expected format and content of audit report, and a statement stating that there could be deviations from the expected report in certain circumstances. Okay, this is read through this again. Okay, firstly, the all agreed terms. Okay, all agreed terms shall be recorded in the engagement letter or in any other suitable written format, and the audit engagement letter shall include objective and scope of audit, auditor's responsibility, management's responsibility, and identification of AFRF or PPFS, and lastly reference to expected format and content of audit report, and a statement that format and content could differ in certain circumstances. Okay, next, now what if a law or regulation has prescribed in sufficient detail the terms of the audit engagement? Okay, so if the terms of audit engagement is already given in any specific law or regulation, then auditor need not record them in a written format except for two things. Okay, he will have to mention two things: that such law and regulation is applicable and the management knows and understands its responsibilities. Okay, so this is must. Okay, so this is definitely one of the biggest parts of audit, right? That the management acknowledges and understands its responsibilities. So basically, if there is a law or regulation that prescribes in sufficient detail as to what the terms of audit engagement should be, then the auditor need not record them in the written agreement except for two things. What are those two things? Firstly, the fact that such law or regulation applies, and lastly that the management acknowledges and understands its responsibility. Okay, let's just go off screen and try to write all this up. Okay. Firstly, all agreed terms should be part of the engagement letter, or rather should be recorded in the engagement letter or in any other suitable written format. Okay, suitable written format. Okay, so these are the this is the first point, right? And next, the audit engagement letter should include what should it include? It should include that there are 5 things, right? So 1, 2, 3, 4 and 5. Okay, so firstly it should include objective and scope, right? Objective and scope of audit, the objective and scope of audit. Okay, next, it should include auditor's responsibility, management responsibility, management responsibility, identification of AFRF, identification of the applicable framework, right? Applicable financial reporting framework for preparation and presentation of financial statements. Okay, and lastly, what else should it include? It should include a reference to expected format and content, expected format and content of audit report, of an audit report, and a statement that the form that, or rather that it could differ in certain circumstances. Okay, next. What else is there? In case a law or regulation, specifies insufficient detail, not insufficient, insufficient details, the terms of engagement then the auditor is not required to record them in writing. Right, except for two things, right? Except for the fact that such law or regulation applies, right? And secondly that what is the other point? The second point was that it's like common sense, right? Basically that the management like this is a must in any agreement with relation to an audit, that the management acknowledges and understands its responsibilities. Okay, that's it. So this is the content of audit engagement letter. Okay, next. So nice, fantastic, we're done with this third part also, right? So SA210, first part was the objective, what we covered, right? And then next the agreement on terms of audit engagement, and then the contents of audit engagement letter. Okay, and lastly now the fourth point is limitation on scope of audit. Basically very basic, this is, I don't think it's going to take that much time. Okay, so if the management or those charged with governance are imposing limitations on the scope of audit such that the auditor believes that the limitation will result in the auditor disclaiming an opinion, then the auditor should not accept that engagement unless it is required by law or regulation. Okay, so if the management is imposing any limitation on the scope of the audit engagement to such an extent where the auditor feels like he will disclaim an opinion, or rather he will give a disclaimer, right? In that case he should not accept that audit engagement unless he is required by law or regulation to do so, right? So in this case, if the management says, you cannot check our revenue, right? So it is imposing a limitation on your audit engagement. So in that case, obviously you will have to give a disclaimer opinion, right? Because you are not able to obtain sufficient audit evidence, and since revenue is such a pervasive financial statement item, you will have to give a disclaimer opinion, right? You cannot just give a qualified opinion and get it over with. So in that case, when the management is imposing a limitation and it will cause you to disclaim your opinion, then the auditor shall not accept such an engagement, okay, unless he is required by law or regulation, right? Very simple. Nice, fantastic, done with another part. Okay, so part 4 is done. Lastly, there's only 2 points that are remaining. Okay, this might take quite a bit of time, okay, but it's quite simple. Okay, let me just zoom out. Okay, so if there is any change in the engagement, meaning firstly I'll just give you a scenario, right? Firstly, they'll want their financial statements to be audited, okay, and then they feel like audit is not necessary, okay, they'll feel like audit is not necessary for their firm, but they want a review done, right? They want a review, okay. So when they're changing their engagement from an audit to a review, should you accept that, right? So if there is any change in the engagement, we are talking only about the audit engagement here, okay. So from audit to any other lower assurance, okay. So audit gives you a reasonable assurance, right? Whereas review gives you only moderate or a limited assurance, right? So wherever you're moving to a lower assurance level, you'll have to be careful, okay. In this case, from an audit, they are moving to any other lower assurance engagements, right? So in this case what is to be done, okay, that we will find that out, okay. So here in this case, we'll just start reading this first, okay. Prior to the completion of an audit engagement, the auditor is requested to change the audit engagement to an engagement that conveys a lower level of assurance. So basically, before the completion of that engagement, the auditor is being requested to change the engagement into a lower change that engagement into an engagement with lower level assurance, right? So what is to be done in this scenario, okay? Firstly, if there is any reasonable justification, right? If there is any reasonable justification, meaning what they have asked is reasonably justifiable, right? Meaning there is some circumstance, right, which you are okay with, right? It is see, for companies, they cannot change it, right? So if that reason what they're giving makes sense, right, if that reason that they're giving is rational, in that case what is to be done, and if the justification that they're giving is not reasonable, right, if the justification they're giving is not reasonable, then what is to be done, okay. So we're going to study these two cases, okay. We'll just start with this no reasonable justification part first, okay, and then we'll move on to what if there is a reasonable justification, okay. So I'll just remind you that we are talking about acceptance in change of engagement, where the management or those charged with governance have requested us to change the audit engagement into an engagement with a lower level of assurance, okay. So either it can be to a review engagement, or it could be any other assurance engagement, or it could be any other related service also, okay. Or related service the related service will not come under assurance engagement, so it is only either to an review engagement or to any other assurance engagement, right? So in this case, where we have where there is no reasonable justification for that change, right, the auditor shall continue to perform the audit engagement as per existing terms of engagement, right? Common sense. If there is no reasonable justification to change that, then we will continue as per the old terms of engagement only. If the management, okay, in this case, if management is preventing or otherwise obstructing the auditor from performing his work, the auditor shall withdraw from the engagement, okay. The auditor will say tata bye bye, okay. Firstly, I'll just explain the chronology again, okay. Chronology समझिए, okay. So the auditor shall the management or those charged with governance have requested the auditor to change the audit engagement into an engagement that provides lower assurance, okay. So the management has requested the auditor to change the audit engagement into an engagement with lower assurance, right? And you find that there is no reasonable justification for this change. What do? In this case, the auditor shall continue to perform his work as per the existing terms of engagement, and if there is any or if the management is preventing or otherwise causing any obstructions in to the auditor in performing his work, then the auditor shall withdraw from the audit engagement and determine whether he has any obligation to report the circumstances to other parties, such as those charged with governance, or to any other or to the owners or to the regulatory authorities. Okay, so I'm sure this is clear, right? So firstly, if the management or prior to the completion of audit, right, this agreement change can happen only prior to the completion of audit. Prior to the completion of audit, the auditor has been requested to change the audit engagement into an engagement that provides a lower level of assurance, and in this case, where there is no reasonable justification to make that change, the auditor shall continue to perform his work as per the existing terms of engagement if the management, right, if the management is preventing or otherwise obstructing the auditor from performing his work, the auditor shall withdraw from such audit engagement and see whether, or rather determine whether there is any obligation, contractual or otherwise. Okay, so he shall determine if there is any obligation to report the circumstances to other parties, such as those charged with governance or the owners or any other regulatory body. Okay, now I think that should be clear. I think we've spent enough time on that part. Okay, next, here we are going to see where in this case, prior to the completion of audit, the auditor has been requested to change the audit engagement into an engagement with lower level of assurance, and in this case the reasons are justifiable. Okay, there is a reasonable justification. Okay, right, so here there is reasonable justification. Okay, firstly, now if the reasons are justifiable or if there is a reasonable justification, auditor must work as per the new terms of engagement. Okay, so whatever the new terms of engagement are, he's supposed to work to that, and auditor must prepare a report in accordance with the new terms of engagement, meaning the report that he generates after the conduct of that assurance engagement should be as per the new terms of engagement. Okay, next, such a report must not include reference to the original engagement, meaning before the change, right? So prior to the change, so it should not contain any reference to the original engagement or to any procedures that are performed in the original engagement. Okay, it should not contain reference to the original engagement, and it should not contain any reference to the procedure, that was any procedure performed in the original engagement. Okay, next, auditor shall record the new terms of engagement in the engagement letter or in any other suitable written format. Okay, that's just I don't think that had any material impact on the answer, right? So obviously he'll have to make a new engagement letter, or he should record the new terms of engagement onto the new engagement letter or in any other suitable written format. Okay. Next, lastly, this is the last. Okay, the terms of a recurring audit engagement. Okay, the terms of a recurring audit engagement. Firstly, the auditor need not send new engagement letter for each period. Okay, auditor shall assess whether the circumstance requires the terms to be revised or reminded. Okay, so situations where there is a need to revise or remind, right? Firstly, there's any misunderstanding as to the engagement, okay, as to the nature of engagement, right? Second, there's any special terms, right? Any new special terms have been added. In that case, there will be a need to revise or remand. Okay, senior management, meaning if there's any change in the senior management, right? And lastly, these four, okay, or these five are related to change. Okay, so if there is a change in ownership, change in management, change in nature, change in framework, change in financial reporting framework. Okay, so here this is change in legal framework, change in financial reporting framework. Okay, so if there's any misunderstanding, if there's any special terms, meaning if there's any special terms of engagement that have been added, or if there's any variation in senior management, or next five are related to change only: change in ownership, change in management, change in legal framework, change in nature, change in legal framework, change in financial reporting framework, and others. Okay, see you guys later. Tata, bye bye, take care.